Hi, fifth graders. This week we are working on comparing with adjectives. First, let's look at comparing with adjectives using the endings ER and EST. You add ER to most adjectives to compare to people, places, or things. Use more with long adjectives to compare two items. Add EST to compare 3 or more adjectives. And finally, use most with long adjectives to compare 3 or more. Let's look at some examples. Most adjectives add ER or EST to the adjective. For example, Tanya is strong. Now I'm going to compare Tanya and Chris. So I'm going to add ER to the ending of the adjective strong. Chris is stronger. And finally, I'm going to add EST because I'm comparing 3 or more adjectives, or 3 or more things. Pat is the strongest of all. Now let's look at using more or most. You use more or most with adjectives that have 2 or more syllables. It is a beautiful view. The adjective beautiful has 3 syllables. It is a more beautiful view from here. It is the most beautiful view of all. Let's practice. Take out your notebooks and title your paper adjectives. Number 1 through 10, skipping a line for each. You do not need to write the entire sentence, just the correct form of the adjective. You are either going to add ER or EST to the end, or more or most in front of the adjective. Let's look at number 1. We'll do this together. Skylar is the blank person I know. The adjective is generous. Because I'm comparing Skylar to 3 or more people, I'm going to add the word most in front of generous. So my sentence should say, Skylar is the most generous person I know. Next to number 1, please write most generous. Now pause the screencast and complete numbers 2 through 10. Welcome back. Now we're going to look at comparing with adjectives using good or bad. The adjectives good and bad have irregular comparative forms. Use better to compare 2 things and best to compare 3 or more. Use worst to compare 2 things and worst to compare 3 or more. Let's look at some examples. This lunch is better than yesterday's. It is the best lunch I've ever had. The first sentence, I use the adjective better because I'm comparing 2 things. The second sentence, I'm using the adjective best because I'm comparing 3 or more things. Let's look at the second example. I did worse on this test than the last one. In fact, this is the worst I've ever done. This first example, I use the adjective worse because I'm comparing 2 things. And the second sentence, I use the adjective worst because I'm comparing 3 or more things. Let's practice. You may need to turn your paper over to the back side. Again, number 1 through 10, skipping a line between each. You are going to fill in each blank using the correct form of good or bad. You do not need to write the entire sentence, just the correct form of good or bad. We'll do the first one together. Number 1, donating used clothing is a blank act than throwing it away. The correct form of the adjective is better. Donating used clothing is a better act than throwing it away. Next to number 1, Please write the adjective better. Let's look at number 2. In fact, it is probably the blank thing you can do with old clothing. Because I'm comparing 3 or more things, I'm going to use the adjective best. In fact, it is probably the best thing you can do with old clothing. Please copy the adjective best next to number 2. Now it is your turn to practice. When you are done, bring your notebook to school tomorrow and your teacher will correct it. Thank you.